This review is brought to you in part by Ryder's Hobby Shops, where the fun begins. Stop in to one of Ryder's two convenient Michigan locations where you'll find a full range of the latest hobby products, supplies, parts, tools, and paint. This review covers the Peterbilt Wrecker Kit. It's a 125 scale kit from AMT number 1133. Now, based on the Peterbilt 359 platform, the addition of the wrecker bed and boom was a natural for the rugged Peterbilt truck. Now, the kit was first issued back in 1971, and it's been reissued a couple times since. And this version from 2019 has new decals. Now, the kit includes over 350 pieces. It's molded in white, clear, and transparent red with some amber parts, chrome parts, and 10 hollow vinyl tires with waterslide decals. It features a custom wrecker body, two-piece telescoping boom, and many accessory items. Now, the molds haven't changed much, so you'll find the model a bit challenging, and the operative word here is to test fit all the parts before you squeeze any glue. Now, I learned when I put the hood assembly in place, the body was not installed properly, which explained some of the connections didn't seem right. So it was an easy fix. I had to move the body assembly forward just a little bit. That's the kind of thing that you'll run into. Do lots of test fitting. Now, when you're done, this kit is about 13 inches long. Now, here is the layout of the parts in the kit. And as you can see, there's quite a few of them. There's even more. But the parts are pretty flash clear. They do have a little bit. And, of course, the inevitable push pin marks that you'll find just about everywhere. But it's quite an expansive kit. And be prepared to take some time with this one. We'll be using mostly liquid cement, sometimes super glue for fragile parts, and white glue or clear glue for the windows and lenses. And remember to heed the manufacturer's safety and use guidelines when using any of the products you see or hear in the review. Here's a look at the decals for the kit, and you see those long stripes, and they really set off the model, but you'll probably need some setting solution to use to keep those nestled into the panel lines. Construction starts with the basic engine block, and I believe this is a turbocharged Cummins diesel, but we're going to need to constantly reference probably the instructions. So those will be made here for some of the sub-assemblies, but you can find all the instructions at the back, and they're broken down into smaller bits so that they're nice and legible for you to use throughout the construction of your kit. Construction is straightforward. The engine is painted flat white, and you can see, of course, the fan and some of the pulleys, belts, etc. in various shades of black. There's also some chrome pieces, but it goes together pretty well. And we'll work on the transmission, and that will be assembled to the back end of the. And now you'll see here the starter will get painted a gloss black, and the fuel filter gets painted orange and attached to the left side. But we're going to put the transmission pieces together and then attach that to the back end of the motor, as you see here. And so here you see a view of the left side of the motor as it's going through its construction, and some of the pieces we just described, you know, the oil filter, etc., have been attached, and the pieces there that you see in the darker colors, those are add-on pieces to the left side of the motor. And here at step 2, we'll start working on the wheel assemblies, and of course the front two wheels go on the cab, and they are quite different than the dualies that are constructed and put in the back. So refer to these as much as you need to. Here you see the parts that are supplied. You know, you've got some chrome trim rings and hubs, the wheel backs, etc. And so those will be assembled here along with some painting that you'll do to some of these pieces. And you see here that in the front wheel, the hubs are painted a gloss red, and then the brake drums are painted a gloss black. And the rear wheel sets follow a similar paint scheme. The brake drums for each there are painted gloss black, and the rear wheel hubs for those which are painted gloss red. Next, you'll assemble the basic chassis. You can see the instructions here give pretty good indication of where the parts go, although they're not always the most positive gluing points, but you'll be able to see when you get those pieces next to the frame where they're located. So take your time, put the frame together, and make sure that it stays flat and straight. You don't want to warp in your basic frame. Once that's done and the glue is dried, you can paint that gloss red as well. Next, we can assemble some of the rear suspension parts, etc. And it's a pretty straightforward thing here. You put the halves together and just make sure that you put the drive shafts in place at the time you're adding the suspension components. Now, also note that the airbag halves, 90 through 97, they've got a number stamped into them from 1 to 4 so that they can be matched with the correct counterpart. Once the airbags are assembled, they can be painted semi-gloss black. And here you see the painted subframe, and note that the axle rods have been installed into the axle housings there. And here you see we'll continue with the drivetrain and some of the backing plates, etc. So gather up these parts and assemble them according to the instructions. Here you see the parts we just described. They've been installed into position and they're all painted gloss red as well. Okay, now we get to that front end. The straight axle there mounts right on top of the springs, well, when it's upside down, in the notch in the middle. And the springs themselves are pretty well located onto the frame, so they should go together easy. And then once that's done, paint them all, of course, gloss red, and leave a little bit of the paint off of the ends where the wheels will be attached. And now the front backing plates will be and the brake cylinders are added to the air cylinder brackets, and then the front backing plates then get installed onto the axle, and they're fitted and attached to the front air cylinder bracket, and that gets placed on the front backing plate. So that goes on for both tires and both sides. Now we're going to add the front cab support and supports there, the idler arm, the steering gear box, and they'll get painted gloss red. And the cab support right side is attached to the frame there, and same thing on the left. The steering box is attached to the cab support left, and the pitman arm gets glued to the steering gear box. Then the idler arm finally is placed between the pitman arm and the front axle. And now here's one of those places where you need to put the drive shaft in before you mount two assemblies. So you're going to add the drive shaft and put it on the back end of the motor, and then locate the motor mounts and glue the motor into place with the drive shaft on the other end at the midship bearing there. Now we'll put the wheels into place. Make sure that you give the axles some support. The rear wheels, of course, you can squeeze those assemblies from each side together so that they're equidistant pressure there. But in the front, hold the back side of the front axle stubs there to make sure you don't snap them or force them too hard, and install the front wheels there too. Now we'll put together the air tank and the fuel tank, and you see the chrome step plate there. There is going to be a longitudinal line through these tanks, so if you want to, you can clean those up, smooth them out to your liking. Then paint those gloss red and attach them to the frame where they are located. There's some ribs there. And then after that, you can put the chrome step there onto the fuel tank. Along with the reserve air tank, you're going to paint the unit red, and then we're going to, before that, we're going to paint the battery flat black, and you can add some color to the caps, and that goes inside of the battery box, which you close up and glue shut, so you'll never see the battery again unless you figure out how to hinge it. And so then we're going to add those units to the frame. As you see, attached here, they get, as I mentioned, painted gloss red as well. The cab is up next, and we're going to pre-drill the holes for the ceiling lights and horns on the roof there. Next up, we're going to work on the cab, and then that, of course, needs to be cleaned up to your liking. Make sure you get all the sprue attachment points cleaned up and any blemishes or anything that you see there. I recommend for most of these body parts that you spray it with some primer first, a light coat anyway. And we're going to go ahead and paint that a gloss red, and then we'll add the windows there, the clear glass units, into the cab with some white glue or some clear part cement. Now the header panel, that's also painted gloss red and installed into the cab with some clear part cement as well. Alright, next we'll work on the interior. You see the parts laid out here, and you'll also notice there are some ejector pin marks on the floor of the tub there, so you might want to clean those up. Now first, the interior section is painted gloss brown with some tester's wood for detailing there, that floor and sidewalls. It's pretty nondescript interior, but do the best you can for a little bit of a flare. And then the clutch pedal, all the pedals and implements there that are used to drive the vehicle are painted semi-gloss black. Now the air ride seat is for the driver, and that's painted gloss brown. The passenger seat cushion gets then assembled for the base, and as well as the air ride seat, and it gets installed onto the floor. And those pieces then are all attached in place in the interior. And by the way, you have to scrape off the paint too, as well as the chrome, to make sure that those parts you're gluing together will stick. Next, we're going to work on the dashboard, and hearkening back to the days prior to cell phones, you'll find that this kit also comes with a shortwave radio that you can install under dash, as well as a CB radio for close range stuff. Now we're going to take the instrument panel halves and assemble them, and then it gets painted semi-gloss black and detailed with some gloss black and some wood colors, and then the instrument panel then gets installed into the floor assembly. Now we'll put together the steering wheel and assembly. The steering shaft that goes through the firewall, that's painted gloss red, and the wheel gets painted gloss white. The column for the steering wheel then is painted with some semi-gloss black, and then the air brake lever is silver. Now go ahead and assemble the units here, and then the shift lever gets attached to the floor, and the steering shaft then is attached to the bottom of the column and protrudes towards the firewall. So you see here the firewall and the cab extensions, and those will get painted gloss red, and the interior assembly then is installed into the cab assembly, and then the firewall and the extensions are attached to the cab, and then finally the cab assembly gets added to the chassis assembly. As I had mentioned before, this is where I made an early mistake, not lining this cab up forward enough. Make sure that you look for the locating notches there. In fact, you may even want to do a little mock-up with the hood and grill surrounds to make sure you get it in the right place. Now the radiator halves will get painted flat black along with the hoses, and they'll be glued into position on the frame. And now we'll work with the air filter. Now the bracket's painted gloss red and attached to the right side of the cab where it's shown, and then the filter halves get put together, and they get attached to the air filter assembly. Now the air intake then goes on top, and then the intake cover is attached to that, and finally then assemble the air filter onto the air filter bracket. Now we'll work on the lubrifier, and it has two halves and topper there, and also a bracket. The bracket gets painted gloss red, and of course you'll have that line right through the center of both halves, so you have to decide what you want to do with that. Either clean it up and paint the unit, or clean it up and send it out for rechroming, or use some chrome paint, etc., or just install it as is. Now we'll work on some lights and horns, and I recommend you put a piece of masking tape down before you cut these off of the sprue to keep them from flying into the carpet monster's mouth. Also, those tiny little lenses, they're a little difficult to pick up. Use a tape around the ends of your tweezers to handle those. And we're going to go ahead and work with those now. Both the air horns and the 5 running lights get attached to the cab, and then once they're stable, you can put the lenses onto those with some clear part cement. Next, we'll work on the left and right mirrors, door mirrors, and I suggest that you clip these off and clean them up, and then assemble the units with some slow setting glue, and after they get kind of tacky so that you can at least handle them, then attach them to the door in the mounting holes where they're positioned. Get the exhaust stacks out and brackets there, and we're going to assemble those halves, and once again there'll be a seam line there. You'll have to decide which one to do with that, and make sure, however, that the cab exhaust pipes are mounted so that they're vertical and perpendicular, so that they look like they're symmetrical and in the right place. We're going to add a couple of pieces here. The windshield wipers are straightforward. You just clip them off without dropping them and put them into place on the cab. But the air hose there, that is something that needs to be kind of wormed through a hole in one of the braces that comes off of the body of the cab, and that gets painted flat black. And then you can see where it goes there with the close-up, and then the it gets attached between the air filter and the air hose, so it's kind of a misdirection. And if you look real closely at the circles there, you'll see where it goes, and the arrow kind of points where it's coming through. Let's add the exhaust pipes now, and notice the sprue is almost the same diameter, and we may need that. The pipes go in place. Of course, one comes out of the engine exhaust manifold and then back to a crossover. Well, that point where they touch is not quite enough, so you may want to take a little sprue about 1/8 of an inch and add it to the end to make sure that exhaust pipe contacts the other one, which feeds the upright exhaust stacks. Well, you can see the routing here, and you can also see they were painted flat black, and then after they were dried, installed into position. We can begin doing some dressing here now, and you see the hood there and the fenders. They will, of course, get painted red, and so will the hood hinges. I suggest you add the hood hinges first to the hood and then paint the whole unit. And the fenders, of course, they get attached to the hood and then sprayed red as well. The grill gets put onto the hood assembly and on the face end, and hinges, of course, we mentioned. If you didn't put them on before, do that now. The mud flaps are semi-gloss black and attached to the fenders. The headlights and the hood ornament are attached to the grill, and the lenses then get added with some clear part cement or white glue. Now the bumper is glued to the chassis assembly, and make sure you get a good location there and some strong glue, and make sure that you scrape any paint or chrome. And the hood assembly then gets installed onto the frame. And in this step you'll see if the body was put into position in the right place, as we've talked about before. Now watch your joins and seams after you clean these up and put them together. All the panels are assembled, and then a light spray of a primer. Let that dry, and then add your gloss red coats to complete and assemble your bed. Some of the attachments for the bed include these pieces, and we're going to take and paint the front support brace and the side braces gloss red and attach those to the platform. Then the jack pads are also red, and the small mud guards are painted flat black before they also are attached to the rear panel. Now locate these parts, the spool halves, and assemble those and paint them gloss red. And the gearbox and the lower spool bearing then also get painted red. Now the gearbox and the lower spool bearing get attached to the platform assembly with the lower spool assembly in between them. Now we'll duplicate that for the upper spool bearing and spool. We're going to add the gearbox and the upper spool bearing to the upper support with the spool assembly in between them. And the small motor, that's part number 204, gets attached to the gearbox. Now locate the boom pivot halves, and they get put together, and the support frames and the boom pivot assembly then are painted gloss red, and the spool support frames are attached to the platform assembly with the pivot boom assembly as well. And the upper spool assembly then is attached to the spool support frames. The boom brace, parts 213 and 14 and part 212 get assembled, and the winch and the motor are attached to the boom brace assembly. Now the boom brace gets painted gloss red, and the assembly then is attached to the left spool support frame. Next we'll locate these parts, and the outer boom halves and the inners are then assembled and painted gloss red, and then the boom rest halves are assembled and painted red as well. The boom base gets painted the same color, and the boom pulley halves are then, those are part 195, those are assembled, and the base is attached to the boom rest, and then the bottom of the boom is attached to the platform assembly. The outer boom assembly then is glued to the boom pivot and the boom rest, and the inner boom is slid into the outer boom. Now the boom pulley gets attached to the inner boom. The light brace number 196 is attached to the front support brace, and then the flasher lens, either red or amber, they get attached to the flasher brace, part number 200, and then attached to the light brace. The spotlight lenses, either color, are installed into the light brace with some clear part cement. Assemble the spare tire halves together and then paint that flat black, and the brackets painted gloss red and attached to the side panel, and then the spare tire gets installed onto that. The boom control box gets painted gloss red, and then the handles are attached to the box, and then it's attached to the platform assembly. Next we're going to add the tow bar to the back end, and of course the halves go together, and the pivots are attached to the rear. You'll do best by looking at the instructions at the end for detailed location, but as you can see, it's attached to the back end, and of course that's what the wrecker is for, to tow something away. Final doodads here at the back end, we're going to add the pintle hook. It gets painted red and added to the rear panel, and the taillight lenses are installed into the rear panel with some clear parts cement. The two step plates then get attached to the rear panel too, and the three side reflectors are attached to the side panel. If you want to kind of add some dimension to your wrecker, there's some accessory parts here. There's a barrel, there's some flags, a broom, a shovel, etc. that you can finish off and add to the bed for use to clean up the wreck. Finally, the main hook, number 192, gets attached to the towing eye on the plate assembly, and you use some black thread, which you have to supply yourself. It is spooled onto the upper spool assembly. Then the black thread is also added to the lower spool assembly and goes to the outer boom. Well, there you have it. Your model is done, and this unit is ready to roll and go save its first victim from a roadside wait. Now, there's a lot of parts here, but this is an older kit. It's old mold standards. You'll have to do a lot of work if you really want to clean it up. But even so, if you just leave some of the things that are contest worthy alone, you can still have a nice looking model. And what great subject matter. It's hard to find kits that delve into these subjects anymore, so we have to go back to the old ones, and this venerable Peterbilt is the perfect platform for a wonderful heavy duty wrecker. And you've seen them out on the roads actually towing semi trucks, so they know how to get the job done. And if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Well, we hope you like this premium step-by-step model kit review, and so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can do that by clicking on the icon on the lower right of any of our reviews, and you could also find us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.